And President Trump says he hopes Russia and Ukraine will make a deal this week to end the war. In a social media post, Trump said yesterday, hopefully the two countries will then start doing big business with the U.S. Joining to discuss the Russia-Ukraine war is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and the host of the Can We Please Talk podcast, as well as Kervin Oken, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army, as well as the host of the This Week Explained podcast. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning. Mike, starting with you, despite what appears to be a failed Easter peace, the two sides did exchange a total of 538 prisoners of war on Saturday. In your assessment, where are we in terms of the road to peace?
Hey, good to see you, as always, Kerry, and good to see my buddy Kervin, who I get a lot of my geopolitics information from. So let's start there. But also, in terms of the peace part of this, and I've spoken to a few members of Congress that are in the Ukraine caucus, and obviously I just had recently a global correspondent on my show, Kerry, talking about this relationship and how we actually broker peace. The U.S. doesn't really have a lot of wiggle room here with Russia, right? This is a nuclear superpower that we're talking about here with respect to what we could do with respect to actually putting pressure on Russia. Most of the leverage that the United States has, and you heard President Trump kind of say there in the clip, if one side doesn't do certain things, he's really talking about Ukraine because that's where all of the existing leverage the United States has is against Ukraine. So in terms of the U.S. brokering peace, Kerry, between these two, they don't really have much to do against Vladimir Putin outside of sanctioning oil and gas, which we would never do because then the price of things will go up in this country and other countries as well. So I think we're a ways away. And this is the conflict that's going on right now is that if you know the history of Senator Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, he's always been against Russian aggression. He's always been against Vladimir Putin. He's campaigned on that even during his presidential run back in the 2015 era. And Donald Trump has always said, we can work with the Russians. I can negotiate with the Russians. So it's opposite viewpoints just in the cabinet itself. And it's leading to a little bit of this tension that we're seeing in terms of trying to broker peace because we're trying to get Ukraine to give up more of the compromise as opposed to having no leverage to get Russia to come to the compromise. So in terms of where we are with respect to peace, I don't know how these talks resume. I know President Zelensky put out something saying about, a 30-day potential ceasefire, and we'll see if Russia agrees to that. But I think we're a long ways away, especially if the United States starts to back out of this as being the mediator.
And I think there's a lot to dig into on your comments there. Kervin, I want to come over to you, though, with the same question. Where do you think things stand at the present moment in your view?
Well, as always, thank you for having me on. And likewise to Mike Leon. It's good to see you, buddy, this early in the morning. Thank you for that introduction as well. Look, where we're at right now is that Russia is in a wartime economy. They have no incentive to broker a ceasefire deal, and that shows in what is happening on the ground right now. Look, this Easter truce that happened is nothing like the unofficial truce we saw in 1914 for the Christmas truce. This was it was a ploy by President Putin of Russia to kind of sow the seeds of chaos and confusion on the battlefield. What he's looking for here is either one of two things or both of these things. One being that the Ukrainian military doesn't get the information in time, and then they fire, and he can then go out and say, well, look, Ukraine did not uphold their end of the bargaining, and that's who Ukraine is. So we're moving away from negotiations with the ceasefire, which is really what he wants to do. And the other thing is to continue to promote President Zelensky of Ukraine as this person who doesn't want peace, this person who just wants to send lines and have them, as lambs out for the slaughter. And what we know in reality is that's what President Putin is trying to do. So where do we stand on talks right now? Well, I think we're exactly where we have always been. We have one country in Ukraine that is ready to do a ceasefire on their terms. And then we have a president in Vladimir Putin who is looking to extend this war in order to do his achieved goal, which is to envelop all of Ukraine as part of the Russian Federation.
Now, Kervin, you mentioned a wartime economy and no incentives for Putin to move forward with peace. There's more incentive to stay in war. So what incentives do you think are realistic? that could move things forward that would be acceptable to the Ukrainians?
Yeah, look, that's difficult to say because everything that President Putin has put on the table as part of a ceasefire deal, he has done that knowing the Ukrainians will not agree to that. That is international recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, the international recognition of those eastern parts of Ukraine, like Kherson and Luhansk, as part of the Russian Federation. And he knows Ukraine's not going to agree to this. So what can happen here? Well, what I would like to see is President Trump be more forceful to Russian President Putin, just as he has done to Zelensky. Look at last week. President Trump said that Zelensky started this war, and you can't start a war with somebody that's 10 times your size. So let's flip that narrative on to Vladimir Putin and see if there are more pressure that can be put on the Russian Federation.
And Mike, as Kervin mentioned, the focus on Putin, it's hard to look at Putin without looking at Trump's latest moves on China and Iran. Those are a big part of Russia's wartime economy. So where do those current negotiations stand, and how does that play into the peace for Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, well, with respect to the tariffs, you're asking, right, Kerry?
Tariffs,
on China.
Tariffs with China, and then a thaw now with Iran for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, well, I mean, and look, one of the big things that's been echoed has been there was no tariffs levied against Russia outside of whatever the 10% global one. But in terms of the China talks and with respect to wherever that nets out, like that's going to impact the global economy, but really that's going to impact a lot of importing and exporting and what we do here in America. But I want to get to the high arching point here, which is we were talking about Iran, Kerry. You just mentioned something about Iran. And these talks that are now happening with Iran, it's interesting to see this play out because a lot of people in the community I've talked to are saying that this could be reframed as something what Obama tried to do with respect to this nuclear deal and getting Iran to the negotiating table and making sure that Iran doesn't reach that nuclear weapon capabilities, which I know a lot of intelligence officers, including one who's on the panel with me here, would say that they're not there yet, but they're getting close to it. And so these are paramount things that are kind of fires that are popping up right now a little bit for the Trump administration that they're trying to put out. But with respect to like how the Trump administration is carrying all of this out, Kerry, I think is more of your broader question. It's like I'm very interested to see because he campaigned on a lot of these things. He campaigned on China. We all know from his first administration, he was always China's always taken advantage of our relationship. With respect to what's happening in Ukraine, he has always said, and this obviously the war wasn't happening during his first administration, but the annexation of Crimea happened post-Obama administration, and he knew that the ramifications of what potentially could happen with Vladimir Putin going even further into Ukraine. He's always said he could work with these countries. And I think the president has always said that he's wanted to negotiate a deal with these countries. He's looking to make a deal. The man wrote The Art of the Deal. So we're going to see if these deals will play out and how will impact the American public going forward. But I think that there's a lot happening right now that people need to stay informed of from a foreign policy perspective that I think the man on the panel with me has done a great job with his show explaining that.
Well, there's a lot to look out for this week. Trump had said last Friday that if there's not progress in the next week, that he might fully pull the U.S.'s support out of the current peace deal. So appreciate you gentlemen joining us this morning, and we'll certainly have to revisit this with you guys very soon. A lot to look out for. Mike Leon, NTD News contributor, host of the Can We Please Talk podcast, and Kervin Oken, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army, as well as the host of This Week Explained. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day.
Thanks, Kerry.